What's up? What's up? I'm Dr. Omatma, host of Egg Meet Sperm, where we're busting fertility myths, sharing tangible tips for your fertility journey, and bringing you the most knowledgeable guests to support your journey to parenthood. This podcast is for both women and men because getting fertile as fuck is for both partners, don't you think? Remember, just listening to this podcast won't get you pregnant, but following the tips we share just may. Let's get you fertile AF so that you can co-create the family you dream of. And if your partner's not listening to this, make sure to share this episode with your partner. Hello and welcome to Egg Meet Sperm. And our guest today is Dr. Bindiya Gandhi, who is a double board certified, Holistic Integrative Medicine as well as family medicine. She's also certified in yoga and is a Reiki master. She used to practice emergency medicine. Dr. Bindiya is a media expert and contributor to numerous sites, including the Daily Mail, MindbodyGreen, PopSugar, Clean Plated, Well and Good, and so much more. When she's not working or writing, you can find her in the kitchen cooking, doing yoga, or enjoying time with her family and pup. Welcome, Dr. Bindiya. We're so excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Yes, absolutely. So, Dr. Bindiya, you have such an incredible story in terms of not only your medical, like how you got into functional medicine. I want to totally know about that. And then I also know that you have a personal story around fertility. So, if you're open to sharing, you can also share that.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I actually got into integrative and functional medicine maybe a longer way. I always knew I was different and I always knew I wanted to help people. And so I did go down the traditional medical school route, but very early on in medical school, just dealing with my own stress and life, I kind of really got deep into yoga and meditation. And that started very early on. And I even remember in my pharmacology class, as we were learning some of the drugs and mechanisms of action, my pharmacology professor would say, this is what is supposed to happen. You prescribe someone one medication and the side effect is actually going to manifest at some point. It's just a matter of time. And I remember being like, but that doesn't make sense. If I'm going to give them I'm going to write a prescription for high blood pressure and now they're going to have leg swelling. Well, that sucks. Then I'm going to see them again and give them another pill for their leg swelling. Like it didn't make sense. And so I was like, what am I going to do? I know I want to help people and I definitely want to go this route. Long story short, during medical school, I ended up becoming yoga certified, Reiki certified, mainly for my own personal wellness, And at that time, a lot of my colleagues were like, why are you studying that? Why are you learning that? What does that have to do with medicine? How are you going to get paid for that? You're a doctor. And I was like, I don't really know. I don't really care. This is something that I need to do. It's like a calling for me. And so at the time, I didn't know there was a word called integrative medicine. I didn't know that even really existed. And so I started, when I was looking in residency, started digging around and realized, wow, there's this whole other world that you can still have a medical degree and you can still incorporate all these other form of modalities of medicine. And I was like, that's it. I'm going to do it. And I learned about Dr. Andrew Weil and I signed up for his fellowship as soon as I was done. So that was just an amazing experience because it was much needed. It was like my calling, but it was also during residency when my own health suffered. So I thought I was eating well, thought I was taking care of myself, meditating, practicing yoga, doing all these things, but I ended up getting sick. And mainly because, as a resident, you're overworked, you're really not sleeping well, you're really not eating as well as you should. There's so many different factors. You're stressed all the time. And I ended up having a lot of GI issues. I ended up having a lot of acne breakouts, hormonal issues, headaches, clenching my jaw, all these things that I felt like I was breaking apart at 30. Like I literally was like, oh my God, I just turned 30 and I feel like I'm dying and I don't understand why. And I had consulted numerous doctors at my program, had seen like every specialist there, but it was a rash on my face that really triggered it. And I had been to the dermatologist, had gotten biopsies, been on every prescription, you name it. I tried it, antifungals. steroids, antibacterials. I don't even know. I took everything that they gave me because I was like desperate to get, it was on my face. Right. So I ended up begging for more tests and they wouldn't want to do any more tests. They're like, well, your biopsy came back negative and normal. I'm like, well, but there's something going on. I'm like, this rash isn't going away. And I even saw the allergy immunologist and he was like, it's kind of in your head. It's stress related. You're just a stressed out resident. You'll be fine. And I was like, this does not make sense. Cause I kept asking, I was like, but there's definitely something wrong with me. Is it an autoimmune condition? Do I have any allergies? Is something am I eating? Couldn't figure it out. Well, again, this is around the same time that I knew I was going to get into integrative medicine but was unaware of a world called functional medicine. So I somehow managed to stumble around a functional medicine doctor and was later diagnosed with celiac and had food sensitivities and GI stuff going on. And once I started healing my gut and honestly stopped eating gluten, that was majority of my problem, then life got night and day better, which was amazing. But yeah, it was my own personal struggle that really was like, okay, you've got to do this. And it was great because I've been where patients have been. I've struggled with so many things and I've spent lots of money. I've been to different doctors. I've been the traditional route. I went to like a really great residency program, like consulted with some really great specialists, and I know how I was treated and felt. So I know, and I can unfortunately relate to patients when they're coming to me frustrated and discouraged, like, oh my God, can you help me?
Yeah, I relate to like so much of your story. I remember I was an undergrad and the path of the Indian woman that's like doctor or engineer, which one is it going to be?
Right.
And I was going through pre-med. I just couldn't wrap my head around the approach of the Western paradigm. And similarly, I was like, oh no, this has to be more integrated. What is it? And it wasn't until a month before graduating from there that someone, or actually not someone, one of the naturopathic schools I got a pamphlet from. And I was like, what is this? It says mind, body, spirit on the cover. And it literally was like, sign me up. Where's the paperwork?
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like I would have had a very similar trajectory if if naturopathic medicine hadn't found me,
Yeah.
as I often like to say. So yeah, I relate to this idea of there's more to life and healing than medications. And I appreciate that perspective from you too, because it is a rare thing, right? Like most MDs are not in that mindset. They're like,
Right.
which drug do you need?
We know them all. We know them all.
Right. Yep. And then going through it for yourself and having that experience for yourself, I'm sure that just makes you such an incredible doctor to be able to see patients and say, oh, yes, I've been where you are and I can support you. I can help you. And that's
Right.
just so powerful.
Yeah. I mean, it's very frustrating, when you feel like nobody's listening to you, nobody's helping you. And I get it, guys. Like I have worked in the traditional medical field in the medical system where we're pushing patients every 7 minutes through the door. And it is like a factory mill. And obviously, I don't practice like that anymore, but I've been in those environments, not just when I worked in the emergency room or urgent care or a traditional family practice, whatever. It's just the dynamic of the medical system is completely different. And unfortunately, that's just what it is. It is what it is.
Yeah. So sharing your story, I would have thought you would end up with a specialty in skin, but you're a specialist in weight loss and leptin resistance. So let's talk about this a little bit. How did you get into that as your specialty?
I will say, I think it kind of just fell into my lap, honestly, mainly because after I healed myself in many different ways. So, one of the things I guess I failed to mention is I thought I was eating well, exercising, doing really well. Weight started creeping up on me in residency. And I was like, what? Like nothing has changed. I'm doing everything the same. And it didn't make sense. In fact, I think I'm probably starving and eating less because there's no time to eat or having a proper meal regimen. But I would remember being a little heavier. And I was like, which just doesn't make sense. I'm still working out like 4 days a week. It doesn't make sense. But of course, like through functional medicine, after healing my gut, weight came off and it was not an issue and has never been, knock on wood, has ever been an issue since then. But Leptin and weight loss resistance really just kind of fell in my plate because over the years, I started helping all these women and started noticing patterns in their health. Some people lost weight easily, some people struggle to lose weight. Most what has happened, unfortunately, in our society is from constantly starving ourselves, constantly trying every diet in the book, specifically trying things like intermittent fasting, keto, and yo-yo dieting for a lot of women, it's actually messed up their metabolism. And so all these women would just come to me. It's so funny how the world and the universe works. For many years, women would come to me because they were struggling to get pregnant. They were coming to me and they were like, you've got to be the one that helps us, you know? And then that transformed to I've had my babies and I'm having trouble getting this weight off. And so it was kind of like over time, I started noticing these patterns and realized, oh, your leptin hormone. And it's connected to so many different things, including insulin resistance and inflammation and so many other things, your thyroid. And once we start tweaking and fixing all these things strategically, the weight comes off and stays off and is no longer an issue.
Yeah. Wow. Awesome. So, what is leptin? Let's dive in.
Let's dive in.
Stuff.
Yeah. So, leptin is a hormone that not many people are aware of. It's actually your satiety hormone. So, our own cells actually produce this hormone and it communicates with our hypothalamus or part of our brain. And that's the part of the brain that regulates our metabolism. Well, leptin's job is to talk to your brain and tell you, okay, do you have enough fat stored? And do you have enough fuel to burn more calories or at a normal rate? That's basically kind of the conversation that it's supposed to have. So, in other words, it's supposed to let us know if we're properly full or satiated and if we can stop eating until we're hungry again. Ideally, that's what's supposed to happen. Now, what's happening with people that have leptin resistance? There's a miscommunication going on. And that miscommunication is basically misinterpreting the information between their brain and the hormone. And that means they're not getting the memo. Their brain is not getting the memo that they're full or they need to stop eating. And so when leptin levels circulate at a higher level, this causes changes in appetites. Maybe you're craving a lot more sugary, sweeter, carby foods. It definitely leads to weight gain, sleep disturbances, anxiety, fertility problems, and actually more. So when the communication is off, you're more likely to have other stuff going on. So leptin is just one part of the conversation, but there's a lot of inflammation that goes on along with it, along with insulin resistance and just gaining weight, which can increase your risk of high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and so many other things. So, but ideally, leptin is supposed to regulate your appetite. And for so many people, it doesn't do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I want to slow it down just a second because I know our listeners are probably thinking, well, how do I measure this? What do I need to do? How do I figure this out if that's my issue? So can you break that down for us?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So first and foremost, I have a free quiz on my site. It's www.drbindiamd.com/quiz. Take this quiz if you may suspect that you may be leptin resistant, having trouble losing weight or any issues along with, weight in general. It's 11 questions and it just takes you through a series of questions that you answer. And it lets you know, it gives you an answer of, are you leptin sensitive? Are you leptin resistant? Are you leptin clear? Because it's the first thing you want to know is this even my problem? Because this may not be your problem.
Exactly.
Because for some people, they're like, yes, that's so me. And some people are like, no, I think this is not me, but I always say, start off with taking the quiz. If you do come back with leptin sensitive or leptin clear, I would definitely work one-on-one with your functional medicine practitioner provider. I hate to say this, but you can go to your primary care doctor or your endocrinologist, and they're not going to want to test this lab because they don't know how to interpret the lab or even know what the results mean. So I highly recommend that you're working with the certified functional medicine practitioner who's able to kind of help you with this. But you get the lab tested and then you kind of analyze where you fall once you have this lab test. So ideally, via blood work, you want your leptin numbers to be between 7 and 10. And even 10 is on the higher range. Majority of my patients coming in today are actually in the 30s, 40s, sometimes 50s, 70 range. It just varies, right? But it's important to kind of know this number because you don't want leptin to be high, but you certainly don't want leptin to be low, right? So a lot of my patients that are struggling to get pregnant, I want to make sure their leptin level is not 3 because that's going to make it harder to actually even conceive. So there's so many different things that we pay attention to, but ideally, you're absolutely right. Identifying, could you possibly have a leptin issue? Take my free quiz. If that comes back abnormal, definitely work one-on-one with a functional medicine provider, or definitely work with me. I'm happy to work with you and kind of help navigate your course. One of the things that we do here at our clinic is we actually do have an online course that's about to be released in a little bit. So even if you're not able to schedule a one-on-one appointment with me, you can definitely take an online course that we have that can kind of help reset your metabolism.
Amazing. I think the first question that a lot of people are having is probably like, what is this? How do I figure out if that's me? So we've covered that. Now, let's suppose that they are mediocre weight, not super high BMI, but not optimal, right?
Yeah.
Like not in that optimal range. Is there a correlation between how much extra weight someone has and their leptin numbers? Or is there like not really a one-to-one kind of?
So, you know what? Yes and no. If you have, okay, so let's rewind a little bit. That's such a great question, but I also want to put it in perspective, right? So, theoretically, one of the ways that we do measure weight, leptin aside, is body mass index, right? So, we measure body mass index. We take your height, your weight, we put it in a calculator, and it kind of gives us a little measurement. And you guys can do this on your own. Google any BMI site, and yeah, and you can do that, right? Anything below 18 is considered underweight, right? So that's the first thing that I want to mention. Normal weight is technically 20 to 24.9, right? That's considered normal body mass index. And then anything above 25 is considered, 25 to 29.9 is considered overweight. Anything above 30 is considered obese. Anything above 35 beyond is considered medically morbidly obese. So we have a little scale that we use in the medical system to let us know, okay, are you underweight? Are you overweight? Whatever. Now, looking at that, that can automatically tell you, okay, yes, you do have a weight issue or not. But that doesn't also take into consideration muscle mass. It doesn't take into consideration volume fluid accumulation. Some of us tend to retain a little bit more fluid. That doesn't mean you're overweight. You know what I mean? So body mass indicator is not the best measure, if that makes sense. But there is a correlation between, for some people, where if you have a higher BMI, you're more likely to have a higher leptin level, but not all the time. Sometimes I'll see patients in my office and I'm actually surprised, like they tend to either have a little bit more muscle mass on them and their leptin levels are still elevated because they still have insulin resistance or still have inflammation. So it's not always, the correlation does not always go direct, if that makes sense, but you can kind of use both to navigate.
Okay. That's really good insight. And you mentioned something about low leptin, low
Yes.
leptin levels, potentially even low BMI, which I see a fair bit, and the correlation of that to fertility, which I know all of our listeners want to know about. So tell us more about that.
Yeah. So important. Like I mentioned, you don't want your leptin levels to be high, but you definitely don't want your leptin levels to be low. So what ends up happening when that miscommunication gets off, sometimes your body thinks you're starving. And when your body thinks you're starving, your body's going to hold on to a lot of fat. Your body's going to hold on to the reserve. And majority of the time, that's what causes leptin resistance. Well, there's an excessive or another direction that this can take in which the body will actually shoot lower. So if your caloric intake is less, if you're over exercising, if you're one of my patients that are in the like female athlete triad kind of picture, which means maybe you've lost a cycle, you're not cycling normally anymore, that kind of thing. You tend to not only be underweight, your estrogen levels tend to be a little bit lower. Just hormones in general tend to be a little bit lower, but leptin also tends to be a little bit lower. Now, when this happens, body's kind of in survival mode. And so you're not going to be producing eggs appropriately. You're not going to be ovulating like you should. And unfortunately, that means when it comes to fertility, your body is like, no, we're in a reserve. You're not strong enough. You're not healthy enough to carry this child. And so you won't get pregnant. And so that's where the fertility struggle is. So a lot of my patients who, when I check their leptin levels and I find out, okay, they're trying to conceive, our job is to get that leptin level a little bit elevated or kind of higher to get them to a healthier state where they can conceive naturally with or without IVF or whatever the protocol plan is at the time. But that's what we do, is just making sure that they're at a healthy level to ensure good results.
Amazing. Yeah. I feel like I see this a lot, is the correlation between women who are not optimal body weight and they tend towards the skinnier side. And some of them aren't necessarily over exercisers and they eat and they have appetite and all of these things, yet they're not putting on the body weight.
Mm-hmm.
And absolutely, the brain goes, I don't have extra reserves to give to a child. No way. I'm trying to like conserve what I have for myself. I'm not
Right,
trying to
right.
produce a baby right now.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a good point. It's not necessarily about being underweight. There are so many underweight women that get pregnant. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's about what the hormones are doing, what the communication with the brain is doing. So, yeah,
Right.
good point.
Yeah. Do you have some ways that people can increase their leptin levels, which I'm sure you're going to do tips and stuff, but I'm curious, what are some natural things that people can be doing to like get leptin regulation?
So, that's a good question because a lot of times people are asking me what to do to reverse their leptin, but
Yep.
increasing your leptin, we do it very strategically because, again, we want the communication to happen where you're not fully just pumping leptin. You don't want it to go strategically from like super low to like 15, like from 3 to 15 overnight. You want it to be strategic. But one of the things that I actually include and incorporate with my patients is something called carb cycling and some having them actually eat a little bit more healthier carbohydrates. And the reason we do that, especially for our low leptin levels, is because carbohydrates really impact your thyroid gland in a positive way. And let me rephrase that, eating the right appropriate types of carbohydrates. So we're very particular about it, right? Not refined, sugary, processed crap, but we're talking about whole grains, whole foods. And so we incorporate this and we'll include this. But the goal is to ultimately slowly have your body and specifically your thyroid and your T3 levels naturally rise. And so when we do that, then it's much easier to bring the leptin levels up and it's much easier for you to conceive.
Yeah. So are you saying that when people have low leptin, they also have low suboptimal thyroid function?
Sometimes we see that. Yeah. Sometimes I see that. That's another big thing I see a lot clinically with my leptin patients. I see a lot of subclinical hypothyroidism or low T3 syndrome or euthyroidism, whatever you want to call them. And that's because their T4 is not converting to their T3. And so when this happens, their, again, body is holding on to reserves. Their body is not picking up their metabolism into gear. And this is one of the reasons why it makes it either really hard to conceive because the thyroid gland is holding on and it's not functioning optimally.
Awesome. I remember doing a talk a really long time ago on leptin, and I couldn't tell you half of what was in it. But what I remember out of it was there was a lot of connection between sleep and leptin resistance.
Yes.
Do you want to mention that at all?
Oh my goodness. There's a lot of connections with a lot of things, but the big connection with sleep and leptin actually comes back to cortisol levels. So again, when you're in a high stress state, you're probably not sleeping well. Or if you are sleeping, you're waking up in the middle of the night. Usually it's at 3 or 4 a.m. waking up and you can't go back to sleep, right? So that's usually a cortisol issue, a stress issue, and sometimes even a blood sugar issue that's going on. When this is happening, you're not sleeping. And when you're not sleeping, your body is not able to get the rest that it needs. So the next morning, guess what you're tending to do? Again, the communication is already off because your body's not rested. So you're more likely to overeat that day. You're more likely to give into your carb and sugar cravings. And sometimes you're unaware why you're craving these carb and sugar cravings, but that's also because the rise of cortisol peaking a lot earlier than it should, which then makes you want to navigate to some of these foods, which then messes up with your whole metabolism and just weight loss ability because you're like, I don't know why I need this chocolate first thing in the morning. Like, I just need it. Like, it doesn't make sense or whatever. So it's really important to focus on getting good quality sleep because that really does regulate leptin.
Amazing. This has been incredible. I'm going to go check out your leptin quiz because I'm curious if I have leptin resistance myself. And I think that this is going to be such a great resource and a tool for people to really look into their leptin levels as part of their journey to conception. Do you have any last things that you want to share with our listeners?
No, one thing I will say is don't get frustrated when it comes to fertility. And don't get frustrated when it comes to your weight and your weight loss. Your weight's going to fluctuate, unfortunately, throughout your whole life. Before you get pregnant, after you get pregnant, your body will change, and that's okay. But what I will say for some people is you really want to focus on the positives. And as your body changes throughout whatever phase you're in, you just want to make sure hormones continue to stay balanced and stay healthy, because your hormones, whether you realize it or not, are talking to us all the time, but we just have to pay attention to them. Half the time we're just in the hustle and bustle of life and taking care of our kids or going to work or being stuck in traffic or dealing with COVID or whatever you're dealing with. We forget to pay attention to ourselves, and we're not intuitive with our hormones. And once you are intuitive with your hormones, life becomes night and day difference, and it actually works on your side.
Yeah. So good. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you that are listening in, keep tuning in all week to hear Dr. Gandhi's tips for you on how to regulate your leptin levels. Was that an amazing episode or what? Make sure to check our show notes so that you can link up with our guests. And if you're not a part of our secret Fertile AF community, you can join for free via the link in our show notes. Last but not least, have you showed us some love lately? It would mean the world to us if you could share and review our podcast. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Egg Meets Sperm. Peace.